2:14 a.m. A fluorescent-lit urgent care room in Northborough, Massachusetts. A woman sat on the examination table with her right wrist cradled against her chest. She had not spoken since the escort brought her in. The escort stood near the door. He was answering the intake questions. Every single one of them. The night shift nurse, a woman named Adela Voss, noticed something. The patient was 23, maybe 24. She was wearing a long-sleeved thermal shirt despite the room being warm. She had not made eye contact once. And on her left wrist, just below the cuff of that sleeve, was a band of pale skin. Lighter than the surrounding tone. The shape of a rectangle. The width of a restraint. Voss logged one line in the intake notes and excused herself to check on supplies. In the hallway, she called the federal tip line from her personal cell phone. The escort was still at the desk. He was still talking. He did not know that the call had already been made. That single call would take 21 days, 3 federal warrants, 1 subpoenaed appointment ledger, and a utility bill running 6 times the neighborhood average before it arrived at a house on the western edge of Millbury, Massachusetts, where 3 women, ages 23, 25, and 26, had been held for 82 days. This is what happened. The Bay State Wellness Annex occupied a low-profile commercial space at the eastern end of Boston Post Road in Marlborough. From the outside, it looked like a dozen other satellite clinics operating along that stretch. A small sign, a shared parking area tucked around the back, opaque window film on the street-facing glass. It was affiliated on paper with a licensed acupuncture practice, headquartered 20 minutes north in Hudson. 3 treatment rooms, a waiting area with 6 chairs, a receptionist who worked 4 days a week. The licensing was real. The acupuncture business in Hudson was real. The affiliation paperwork had been filed correctly with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. State inspectors had visited the clinic twice in the 18 months since it opened. Both times they noted no violations. The annex had been designed to pass those inspections. It was built to look functional, just long enough to look legitimate. What was actually moving through Bay State Wellness Annex had nothing to do with acupuncture. Federal investigators would later describe it as an intake point. Clients would arrive, that was the word in the internal records, clients, and be assessed in one of the 3 back rooms. They would not schedule follow-up appointments. The appointment ledger, subpoenaed in mid-March of 2026, showed a consistent pattern: initial intake entry, no return visit, no referral note, no billing code for follow-up care. The client came in once, and then, in the official record, simply ceased to exist. Industry standard for any functioning medical or wellness practice. A return visit rate of 40 to 60%. The Bay State Wellness Annex had a return rate of 0. That number does not occur naturally in a legitimate practice. It means the clients were not there for treatment. The Millbury residence was 41 minutes west on Route 9. A 2-story wood frame house on a residential street south of the town center. It had been rented under a limited liability company registered in Delaware with no public-facing principals. The utility account was in a different name entirely. Neighbors later described the occupants as quiet and rarely visible. One described seeing a white cargo van parked in the driveway most mornings. A second described noticing that the windows on the second floor were covered with blackout material, but had assumed it was a night shift worker sleeping during the day. Neither neighbor had called anyone. The van made the Marlborough to Millbury run on a pattern that surveillance would eventually confirm. Tuesdays and Fridays, always in the hour before midnight, never the same route twice in a row. 3 women from towns across central Massachusetts had been reported missing in the spring of 2025. The first, age 23, was a certified nursing assistant from Worcester who had last been seen leaving her apartment on the evening of April 9th. The second, 25, was a restaurant manager from Fitchburg who had not shown up for a scheduled shift on May 2nd and had not contacted family since. The third, 26, was a warehouse logistics coordinator from Leominster, reported missing by her mother on May 17th after she missed 2 consecutive Sunday phone calls. 3 missing persons cases. 3 different jurisdictions. No investigative connection established between them at the time of filing. Worcester County Sheriff's Office, Fitchburg Police, Leominster Police. Each case assigned to a local detective, each treated as a standalone adult missing persons file. The FBI's Boston field office had not yet been involved. No one had drawn a line connecting the 3 cases. No one would draw that line for another 9 months. The tip Adela Voss called in on the night of March 3, 2026, went to the Homeland Security Investigations tip line. It was logged at 2:27 a.m. and assigned a case number within 4 hours. By 8 a.m. the same morning, it had been routed to the HSI Boston field office. The intake notes Voss had written were brief. The patient had presented with a fractured distal radius, consistent with a fall or impact. She was accompanied by a male escort who identified himself as her brother. The patient did not confirm or correct that identification. The patient had not spoken directly to intake staff during admission. And the nurse had noted one additional observation: circumferential hypopigmentation, left wrist, proximal. 4 words that carried the weight of an inference the clinical record could not make explicitly. The HSI duty officer who reviewed the note that morning had seen that language before. One detail that stuck with us when we went through the case timeline: it wasn't the fracture that triggered the call, and it wasn't the escort's behavior alone. It was the combination of those things with one clinical notation that Adela Voss had been trained, by exactly nobody, as far as anyone could determine, to include. She included it anyway. That instinct was the entire case. The fractured wrist patient was identified through the hospital's intake record as a woman using identification belonging to a 24-year-old resident of Worcester. HSI ran the name. The woman had not been reported missing. She was not in any federal database as a known victim. She appeared, on paper, to be an adult who had sought treatment for an injury. But the escort who had answered every question, the man who had identified himself as her brother, had paid the urgent care bill in cash. At 2:38 in the morning, cash payment at that hour, for that type of visit, using a visiting hours ID badge that was later found to be a forgery. The forgery was not detected at the desk that night. It was detected 11 days later, when HSI agents reviewed the security footage and ran the badge number against the hospital's credentialing database. The badge number did not exist in any Massachusetts medical facilities system. The man had been in the building for 22 minutes. He had left with the patient. The woman had not returned to the facility for follow-up care, despite a fracture that would require a cast and a return visit within a week. HSI Special Agent Dara Kowalski was assigned the case on March 4th. She pulled the security footage. She ran the escort's face through available databases. No match on the first attempt. She requested a second analysis using a different recognition protocol. The second run produced a partial match to a man associated with a Hospitality and Wellness LLC, registered in Worcester County in November of 2024. The LLC had one listed asset, a stake in the Bay State Wellness Annex on Boston Post Road in Marlborough. Kowalski called the FBI Boston field office at 11:42 a.m. on March 5th. The call lasted 18 minutes. By the time it ended, the case had a joint task force. What's most surprising about this investigation is how little time elapsed between the tip and the first warrant application: 8 days. Federal warrants for medical records typically take 3 to 5 weeks to prepare. The task force compressed that to 8 days because of one thing: the 3 open missing persons cases from Worcester County, which an FBI analyst named Marcus Reyes had been cross-referencing with unresolved HSI intake flags for the previous 6 weeks. Voss's tip hit a database where Reyes had already assembled the scaffolding. The 3 missing women had not been connected, but Reyes had been quietly building a matrix of central Massachusetts missing persons filings from the prior 12 months. He had flagged a geographic cluster, Worcester, Fitchburg, Leominster, all within a 40-minute radius, all adult women between 22 and 28, all with no prior history of voluntary disappearance, all last seen in the April through May window of 2025. He had no case. He had a pattern. The Voss tip gave the pattern a physical address. The first subpoena was served on the Bay State Wellness Annex's affiliated acupuncture practice in Hudson on March 12, 2026. The clinic's appointment ledger covered 18 months of operation. The subpoena requested all intake records, all scheduling data, all billing records, and all correspondence with the Delaware LLC. The ledger arrived in digital form on March 15th. It ran to 411 pages. Reyes worked through it over 3 days. The pattern was immediate. In 18 months, the annex had logged 167 intake appointments. Of those, 0 had generated a follow-up visit. 0 had generated a referral to another provider. 42 had generated a billing claim to a health insurance plan. All 42 of those claims had been denied as fraudulent within 60 days of submission. The remaining 125 appointments had been billed in cash, with no insurance claim filed. 125 cash appointments. Average billing notation, $340 per visit. Total cash intake logged in the ledger, $42,750 over 18 months. For a legitimate 3-treatment room wellness clinic, that revenue figure represented approximately 11% of minimum operational costs. The clinic was not generating its real income from appointments. The task force requested a second subpoena covering the utility records for the Millbury residence. The Millbury house was a 4-bedroom wood frame structure. Neighborhood average monthly electricity consumption for a house of that size and vintage, per National Grid data for that service area, ran between 600 and 800 kilowatt-hours per month. The Millbury house's consumption over the prior 6 months averaged 4,920 kilowatt-hours per month, 6.15 times the neighborhood average, with no registered business operating at the address, no electric vehicle charging equipment on file, no pool, no workshop permit. Something inside that house was running continuously and consuming power at a rate consistent with either industrial equipment or a large number of occupied spaces requiring climate control and artificial lighting around the clock. Kowalski drafted the affidavit for the surveillance warrant on March 19th. It was approved by a federal magistrate in the District of Massachusetts on March 20th, 2026. Surveillance began the following morning. The first 4 days produced limited direct intelligence. The cargo van was observed leaving the Millbury residence on Tuesday, March 24th at 11:17 p.m. and arriving at the Boston Post Road location in Marlborough at 12:02 a.m. It remained there for approximately 40 minutes. It departed and returned to the Millbury address, arriving at 1:44 a.m. The van did not stop anywhere between the 2 locations on either leg of the trip. Agents had requested authorization for a GPS tracker on the van. The authorization came through on March 26th. A maintenance crew with a city utilities cover identity placed the device on the vehicle frame at 6:41 a.m. on March 27th, while the van was parked at the Millbury address. On Friday, March 28th, the van made its second observed run. The tracker confirmed the same route, Millbury to Marlborough, 41 minutes, no intermediate stops. Agents requested a close surveillance pass on the annex during the van's presence. Two agents in an unmarked vehicle made a single slow pass along Boston Post Road at 12:14 a.m. They observed lights active in the rear section of the clinic, one vehicle, the white cargo van, in the rear parking area, one additional passenger vehicle, black, Massachusetts plates. The passenger vehicle was registered to a holding company with the same Delaware registered agent as the LLC that held the Millbury lease. One thread, two addresses, one Delaware shell. It was the same entity operating both locations. The task force now had enough to establish the operational connection between Marlborough and Millbury. What it did not yet have was confirmation of who or what was being transported in the van. That confirmation came from an unexpected obstacle. On March 31st, the GPS tracker on the cargo van stopped transmitting. Battery failure or possible detection and removal, the task force could not immediately determine which. For 72 hours, the van's movements were untracked. During those 72 hours, agents maintained static visual surveillance on the Millbury address from a position 2 blocks south. On the morning of April 1st, a surveillance agent observed an exterior door at the rear of the house open briefly. A woman appeared in the doorway for approximately 4 seconds. She was not wearing a coat despite the temperature being 31 degrees Fahrenheit. She looked at the backyard. Then she looked at the street. Then someone behind her pulled the door closed from the inside. The surveillance agent captured 12 frames of usable footage. Facial recognition returned a possible match to the logistics coordinator from Leominster, last seen on May 16th of 2025. Possible match not confirmed. The footage resolution was limited by distance and brief exposure. But it was enough. Kowalski brought the frames to the Leominster missing persons detective that afternoon. The detective looked at the frames for approximately 30 seconds. Then he said, "That's her." The arrest warrant applications were filed that evening. Here's what happened next. The task force had been moving carefully for 21 days, accumulating documentary evidence, building a clean warrant package. The single moment of visual confirmation from a woman who appeared in a doorway for 4 seconds accelerated the entire timeline by roughly 2 weeks. Because once they had confirmed a victim's presence at that address, the calculus changed entirely. Every additional hour of surveillance was an additional hour those women remained inside. The breach was authorized for April 3rd, 2026. Most people assume large federal operations have days of tactical preparation once a final warrant is issued. In this case, they had 36 hours. The Millbury property's floor plans were obtained from the Worcester County Assessor's Office, but they were from the original 1894 permit filing. The interior had been modified multiple times in the intervening decades, and the current layout was unknown. The task force had exterior surveillance footage, utility data, and one brief doorway observation. They did not have confirmed interior intelligence on the number of occupants, the presence of weapons, or the physical location of the 3 women inside the structure. Put yourself in the position of the breach team commander. You have a building with an unknown interior layout, a minimum of 2 known associates on site based on vehicle registrations, and 3 women whose exact locations inside a 4-bedroom house you cannot confirm. You have 36 hours to plan. The question of whether to wait for better intelligence or move on the available evidence was, according to later court documents, the single most contested decision in the operation. The team commander made the call, April 3rd, 4 a.m. One obstacle, the revised floor plan, assembled from exterior measurement and thermal imaging, showed the Millbury house had a basement level not reflected in the original permit documents. The thermal signature from below the ground floor was consistent with occupied space. The original breach plan had not included a dedicated basement clearing team. The solution, finalized at 11:40 p.m. on April 2nd, a third entry team was added, specifically for the basement approach. Canine units were repositioned. The breach timeline was extended by 4 minutes to accommodate the additional entry point. 4 minutes that, in a dynamic entry scenario, represented a significant increase in operational complexity. At 3:58 a.m. on April 3, 2026, the teams were in position. 2 locations. Simultaneous entry. Millbury, FBI SWAT. 8 agents on the primary stack, 3 on the basement approach, 2 on rear containment. Canine unit deployed to the basement team. Marlborough HSI tactical team. 6 agents. Single structure entry. Primary objective, record seizure and detention of any persons present at the Bay State Wellness Annex. The command signal went at 4:02 a.m. Millbury. The front door came down in 1 breach. The primary stack moved through the entry in sequence. First floor cleared in 40 seconds. 2 individuals encountered in the main living area, both male, both taken to the ground without resistance. Both were in custody within 90 seconds of entry. The basement team made entry through the exterior cellar door on the east side of the structure. The canine unit cleared the space in advance of agents. The basement was a finished space, drywall, carpet, drop ceiling, a separate climate control unit. The thermal imaging had been accurate. The space was occupied. 1 woman was found in a locked interior room off the main basement area. She was 25 years of age, later confirmed to be the restaurant manager from Fitchburg, missing since May 2nd of the prior year. She received immediate medical evaluation. A second woman was located on the 2nd floor of the main structure, in a room secured from the outside with a padlock. She was 23. She was the nursing assistant from Worcester. The same woman who had been brought to the Northborough urgent care on the night of March 3rd, the woman whose wrist Adela Voss had looked at twice. The third woman, 26, the logistics coordinator from Leominster, was found in a rear first-floor room. She had been the woman in the doorway on April 1st. She was the one whose 4-second appearance had collapsed the timeline. All 3 were transported by ambulance to UMass Memorial Medical Center in Worcester. All 3 were admitted for clinical evaluation. The nature and duration of their confinement were reflected in their medical records, which remain sealed under federal protective order. The records are part of the government's evidence in the criminal case. They are not part of the public record. The medical team at UMass Memorial later confirmed, in a single public statement, that all 3 women received immediate attention and were in stable condition upon admission. The statement contained no additional clinical detail. At the Marlborough Clinic, the HSI team encountered 1 individual inside the building at the time of entry. A records technician, as she identified herself, who had been present during the early morning hours consistent with the van's prior visit pattern. She was detained without incident. The clinic's filing systems, electronic records, and physical appointment ledger were seized in their entirety. A secondary set of records was found in a locked cabinet in the rear treatment room. Records that did not correspond to any of the names or dates in the official appointment log. The secondary records contained 112 entries. Each entry had a name, a date, an origin city, and a dollar figure. The FBI is still working through those entries. 112 entries. The Marlborough operation had been running since at least October of 2024. The 3 women recovered from Millbury represented 3 of those entries. The status of the remaining 109 is not fully established. That number, 109, is where the case becomes something larger than the rescue of 3 women from a house in Millbury. Here's what stands out. The licensing system that allowed Bay State Wellness Annex to operate for 18 months with 0 regulatory action is the failure that requires the most direct examination. Not the criminals. They behaved like criminals. The state inspection process visited that clinic twice. It found no violations. That is not because the violations were well hidden. That is because the inspection protocol was not designed to detect this type of operation. The visitors checked fire codes and sanitation. Nobody asked why a wellness clinic had a 0% follow-up rate over 18 months. That question was not on the checklist. It should be now. Erlen Vass, the man identified as the primary operator of the Millbury residence and the controlling party behind both the Delaware LLC and the Bay State Wellness Annex affiliation structure, was taken into federal custody at a separate location in Shrewsbury at 4:17 a.m. on April 3rd, arrested by a second HSI team operating on a parallel warrant. He was indicted on June 30th, 2026, in the United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts. The indictment carried charges including conspiracy, unlawful restraint, forced labor, and document fraud. A co-defendant, identified in court documents as the man who had accompanied the woman to the Northborough urgent care on the night of March 3rd, was arrested in New Hampshire on April 11th and indicted on the same set of charges. A third co-defendant, the individual registered as the managing member of the Delaware LLC, has not been located as of the date of this filing. A federal warrant remains active. A fourth individual believed to have operated the transportation route between Marlborough and Millbury is also at large. The records seized from the Marlborough clinic reference 2 additional addresses in eastern Massachusetts. Both addresses are under active federal investigation. Neither has been publicly identified. The scope of what operated through Bay State Wellness Annex appears to extend beyond the Millbury property. The answer changes what needs to be fixed. The 2 men taken into custody at the Millbury house during the breach appeared in federal court in Worcester on April 4, 2026. Both entered not guilty pleas. Both remain in federal detention pending trial. Vass's initial appearance before the magistrate was the same day. He also entered a not guilty plea. The sentencing guidelines for the charges in the indictment carry potential terms of up to 20 years on the primary counts, with enhancement provisions based on the duration and nature of the confinement. Prosecutors have indicated they will seek the maximum enhancement based on the documented 82-day duration. Adela Voss was interviewed by federal agents on April 8, 2026. Her statement to investigators was later cited in the prosecution's evidentiary brief as the initiating document for the case. She was not called to testify before the grand jury. Her name appears in the indictment once, as the source of the March 3rd tip. She is not a party to the criminal case. She is a witness. She has not spoken publicly about what she saw on the night of March 3rd. The one line she logged in the intake notes, circumferential hypopigmentation, left wrist, proximal, runs to 4 words in the medical record. Those 4 words are on page 1 of the government's evidence exhibit list. 4 words and a phone call made at 2:27 in the morning. There's a line in the affidavit supporting the search warrant that reads almost like bureaucratic understatement. It says the clinical observation was consistent with the application of a restrictive device over a prolonged period. That sentence does a great deal of work in very few words. It tells you exactly what it needs to tell you, and it tells you nothing more. The restraint that left a mark on that woman's wrist is described only by its trace. The document never describes the restraint itself. It doesn't have to. The case file for what federal investigators internally called the Bay State Captivity Investigation runs to approximately 4,200 pages as of the date of the indictment. It includes surveillance footage, utility records, the subpoenaed appointment ledger, the secondary records seized from the Marlborough clinic, GPS tracker data, facial recognition analysis, the urgent care intake record, and the medical documentation from UMass Memorial. Page 1 is Adela Voss's tip sheet. Timestamped 2:27 a.m. on March 3, 2026. The women who left that house in Millbury on the morning of April 3rd have not made public statements. They are not required to. Their names are protected under federal victim privacy statute. What is known publicly is what the indictment and the bail hearing transcripts confirm. 3 adults, reported missing from central Massachusetts towns, recovered after 82 days, transported by ambulance, received immediate clinical evaluation. The families were notified before the ambulances reached UMass Memorial. The logistics coordinator from Leominster, the woman in the doorway, the 4-second appearance that moved the timeline, had been reported missing by her mother. Her mother had called the Leominster Police Department every week for 47 weeks. The records show 47 follow-up calls in the case file. The last one was on April 2, 2026, at 7:14 in the evening, less than 9 hours before the breach. The Millbury house is currently sealed as a federal crime scene. The Bay State Wellness Annex on Boston Post Road in Marlborough has been shuttered under a federal seizure order. The affiliated acupuncture practice in Hudson voluntarily surrendered its state license in April and is cooperating with the investigation. The Delaware LLC that held the lease on the Millbury property had no assets on file at the time of seizure beyond the lease itself. No bank accounts. No registered vehicles. No other real property. The financial flows connected to the operation, what the secondary clinic records imply across 112 entries over roughly 18 months, have not been fully traced. Federal financial investigators are working that thread. No estimate of the total proceeds has been made public. 109 entries in the secondary record, beyond the 3 women recovered. The investigation into those entries is active. Some of those entries may represent individuals who are no longer locatable. Some may represent victims in other jurisdictions whose cases have not yet been connected to this one. The FBI has not stated publicly how many of those 109 represent individuals who were located and returned to normal life, and how many remain unaccounted for. That number sits in the case file. Incomplete. Open. Will the licensing framework for satellite wellness clinics in Massachusetts be modified to require return rate auditing as a condition of annual renewal? The state legislature's Public Health Committee has received a copy of the inspection report. No legislation has been filed as of July 7, 2026. Comment your answer. We read every one. The network that operated through Bay State Wellness Annex and the Millbury residence has been dismantled at those 2 nodes. The indictment names 4 defendants. 2 are in custody. 2 are not. The secondary records reference 2 additional locations that remain under active investigation. Those locations have not been named publicly. The demand that creates operations like this one was not addressed on April 3, 2026. What was addressed at 4:02 in the morning in a wood frame house on a residential street in Millbury was the specific captivity of 3 specific women: a nursing assistant, a restaurant manager, a logistics coordinator, ages 23, 25, and 26, all from central Massachusetts. All reported missing in a spring that, for the people waiting for them, had stretched across 2 seasons. They came out of that house under blankets, in the dark, walking toward ambulance lights. The case that put them there remains open. 2 warrants are still active. 109 names remain in a ledger. The night shift nurse who made a call at 2:27 in the morning will not be the last person in this story to notice something that everyone else missed. The next notice may already be logged somewhere, waiting for someone to read it twice.